Hey, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is Wayne Bell, the training coordinator with the Office of Equal Opportunity and Compliance at the University of Arkansas. We still have a few people trickling in, but we're going to begin and turn things over to Dr. Danielle Williams from the Office of Equal Opportunity and Compliance at the University of Arkansas Fayetteville.
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. So, as Wayne had indicated, my name is Dr. Danielle Williams. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor and Director of Equal Opportunity and Compliance. And we are very happy to welcome you today to our webinar entitled "In Forging New Paths, AAPIs in the Legal Profession." So this event is in celebration of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, where the Office of Equal Opportunity and Compliance, in collaboration with our Asian Pacific American Employee Impact Group and the School of Law, is bringing this virtual panel to you to highlight some remarkable professionals in the legal profession. And as I said, we're very honored to have all of our participants today, as well as you, the attendees, hopefully that you will engage with us during this webinar today. So our moderators are Dr. JiaBin Huang, President of the Asian Pacific Islander Employee Impact Group and Professor of Violin for the Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences. And then Edison Williams, who is the University of Arkansas Fayetteville School of Law Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coordinator, who also is going to be serving as one of our moderators. And soon after you hear me, you'll be Dr. Kong will be introducing our panelists, and then we will go right into our panel discussion. And after our panel discussion, Ms. Mary Margaret Hoy, Senior Executive Assistant and Chief of Staff to the Dean of the College of Education and Health Professions, will be bringing our closing remarks. So a few things we want you to be mindful of today. We want this to be a very engaging panel discussion. So feel free to put any questions that you may have to our panelists in the chat. Edison and Ergene will be monitoring the chat to ensure that they are giving opportunities for our panelists to respond to your questions. So again, please do so. We want, again, this to be an engaging discussion. So again, we look forward to this opportunity, and I hope you do as I do, to share some important topics related to the AAPI community. And I know this is a wonderful opportunity to get firsthand information from our experts that have a wealth and breadth of experience. And we hope that you are able to glean a lot of information. And so it will be a profound and positive impact on our campus. So as you see on the screen, we do have a disclaimer from the Office of Equal Opportunity and Compliance. We want to make sure you understand that the information here, it should not be used as legal advice. You should also, if you choose to, seek legal advice either from our counsel on campus, if you work at the University of Arkansas, or any independent counsel on campus. So we just want to ensure you know and understand and express that this information, again, should not be listed or taken as legal advice. So next, before I turn it over to Dr. Kong, we would like to show a short video. Wayne?
Hi, everybody. 여러분 안녕하세요. My name is Ergene Kong, and I am a Korean American violinist, music professor, and president of the Asian Pacific Americans Employee Impact Group.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Margaret Hoy. I'm the Assistant Director for First Generation Student Support in the Office of Student Success.
Hi, my name is Gwenna Burks from the Pat Walker Health Center, HIM Medical Record.
Hi, my name is Jacob Wynn. I'm a current freshman at the University of Arkansas, and I'm majoring in computer engineering.
I'm Kaka Abdullah, originally from Indonesia, and I'm working for Campus Card Office.
I'm Monsu Park, an associate professor of music and voice.
Hey everyone, my name is Weston Waldo, originally from Houston, Texas. My family and I just moved to Northwest Arkansas for a job in the Technology Ventures Department at the University of Arkansas.
大家好, my name is Tongya Zhang, and I'm a friend of the APA employee impact group.
Hi, my name is Song. Nyojong, that's hello in Hmong. Happy Asian American Pacific Islander Month.
I'm Bhavika from Division of Agriculture. 21 years ago, I came from Sri Lanka for my PhD in food science. For the last 17 years, I have been with the research support system of the Department of Animal Science. I want to wish you all a very happy APA Heritage Month.
Hello everyone, my name is Nami and I work in the International Students and Scholars Office. I am originally from Japan and I'm so passionate about working with the international students and scholars from all over the world at the University of Arkansas.
I am so proud to wish everyone a happy APA Heritage Month. As a Chinese American woman, this month means so much to me and I'm really excited to celebrate it with you.
APA is important to me because I can fall back on a group of people who have the same background as I do.
Filipino American, happy APA Heritage Month.
Happy Asian Pacific Heritage Month.
Happy APA Heritage Month.
My name is Waldo and I just moved with my family.
Hi, I'm Hannah Waldo. I'm from South Korea. I'm staying home mom.
I hope everyone has a wonderful and happy APA Heritage Month. Thank you.
Happy APA Heritage Month.
Happy APA Heritage Month.
Wishing everyone a very happy and safe Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month.
Happy APA Heritage Month.
Happy APA Heritage Month to everyone. Let's bring the world and diversity to the campus community.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to echo Dr. Danielle Williams' welcome message, and I also wanted to echo... I'm sorry, I think my building is having a fire alarm, so I apologize for that. Edison, would you like to take over for a second while I mute myself?
Sure. Like Arjun was saying, good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending. We have the pleasure of having three illustrious panelists with us, and so we thank them. So Brian, Kim, and Sol are here to help us today, and Arjun and I will be doing the moderation for this as well. And we're actually going to begin with some questions to hear from the panelists. And as you can see on the screen, Brian is president of the Arkansas Colleges of Health Education. Kim is assistant professor of law, director of business innovations clinic, and Sol is an immigration law attorney at Taylor Law Firm.
Thank you so
much. So now that we're, oh no, you're welcome, Arjun. Oh no, and so now we have our panelists here on the video, and so we're actually going to get started. I'm actually going to introduce the first question, allow them just to tell us a little bit about themselves. So Kim, Brian, and Sol, we can go in that order. Kim, you can start. Can you please share with us a little bit about your upbringing and how you got introduced to the law?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Kim Vudin, and as explained, I'm a professor. I run the Business Innovations Clinic, which works with small businesses and entrepreneurs in the region in Arkansas to building capacity. We provide transactional legal services, and I would say about 2/3 of the businesses we serve are minority businesses. I first became interested in the law. I was pretty young, actually. I'm like a little embarrassed to admit that a lot of TV made me much more interested in the law than the sciences, which is how my father came to this country. He came to do his research after his postdoc research in the US. And I know him and my mom always kind of dreamed and hoped that one of us would become a doctor, and none of us have. Instead, two of us become lawyers. And, my interest was really from just popular culture. My mom was a lawyer. She was an immigration lawyer. She became a lawyer later in life after I was like 10 or something. And they never thought, they always thought of the law as something to keep her busy. It wasn't, in my generation, it wasn't really considered a respectable profession for first generation immigrants, or at least in their community. And it was always thought of as science is the safe way to go. Science is the safe way to go. So it kind of came by happenstance. And after I applied to law school, they understood, really this is something I wanted to do. And they were supportive of it after that.
Great. Thank you, Kim, for sharing. Brian, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me as a participant in this event. I have to say, over the years, I've participated in a lot of these kinds of events, dating all the way back to the early 80s, talking about Asian Americans in the law. And one of the things that I thought about in preparing for this participation was that nearly 40 years later, we're still talking about that. Because when I was in law school in 1982, there was just a handful of Asian American law students throughout the country, let alone lawyers. And when I started practicing law in 1985, I was one of 2 Asian American lawyers in a county the size of 1.5 million people in Maryland, a suburban community of Washington, D.C. So it always makes me wonder about the reasons for these kinds of conversations. How I got into the law was after we came to the United States in 1968, like Professor Vudin, my parents, particularly my father, instilled in me the need to obtain knowledge and information as a gateway to getting out of a certain status. As immigrants, unlike Professor Vudin, my parents were not either a postdoc or an attorney. They came from what in Korea would be considered good families, but following the war, all of their fortunes were ruined. And so we came as mere immigrants. If you've seen the recent movie Minari, that might give you an understanding of the immigrant experience. That experience was very much like my own experience. And having spoken to some of the students here at our campus, some of the immigrant students, they're still facing that kind of experience. But through that, my father said to me, I have to become a lawyer because of the position that information gives you, being able to navigate through American life and American culture. And as immigrants, it's typical to be entrepreneurial, because even with a foreign education, that doesn't necessarily translate into a commodity or a professional skill. And so many immigrants with vast amounts of education go into entrepreneurial businesses to build their lives, to rebuild their lives in the United States. And that's what my parents did. And seeing how they struggled through those processes, not knowing how to go about from one process to another, trying to keep their businesses afloat, it became clear to me that the law was an answer. And for me personally, to become a lawyer, I wanted to be a trial lawyer. One, because I had never seen a trial lawyer in court who was Asian American. In fact, when I was practicing law, a judge asked me where I was in my coat and tie, "Where is your lawyer?" Because the judge assumed that I was a criminal defendant. And when I sheepishly said, "Well, Your Honor, I am the lawyer," suddenly all things went quiet in the courtroom. So, it's those kinds of experiences that have affected and informed, as the question asks, informed my life on a career path in law. The law is useful in many ways. Presently, after 30 6 years, having graduated from law school. I don't practice law anymore as such, but having practiced law, both as a trial lawyer and having sat as a judge, is given me the tools to understand processes, analytical and critical skills in looking at problems and problem solving. So that's how I ended up in the law, and the law is a great career because it can take you just about anywhere you want to go. And as I've told my son, who is currently in law school, I tell my son I'm living proof of that very statement.
Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing. So,
good morning, everyone, and thank you again to everyone participating in this panel today. I grew up in Korea up until I was about 8 years old, and it was, just my parents having other business opportunities in different parts of the world that took my family to different parts of the world. One of the hardest questions for me to answer is, where are you from? Because I've lived in Russia, I lived in Mexico, Guatemala, United States. So that's a very hard question to answer for me, but it has shaped who I am in a very positive way and a very unique way, because not many people can say the same about their experiences. One of the things that I think stands out about my upbringing is that I was very fortunate to have parents who were very, very supportive and provided me life of, I think, relative privilege. Growing up, I went to private schools in Latin America, high school, middle school, and I was given, every opportunity that my parents could afford so that I could have a really good education, and was able to travel and see the world and things of that nature. I was also fortunate to grow up with in a household where my parents really never pressured me to be one thing or the other. And I am very well aware of the reputation of Asian parents and to a large extent immigrant parents, because I had other friends who had parents who had those expectations for their children, that they would be doctors or dentists, lawyers or judges. I never grew up with that pressure, and when I went to college, I majored in political science, and then the brutal truth is that when you study liberal arts, a lot of times, come senior year, you realize that it's not as easy to find a career in specifically what you studied, which led my interest in going to law school, which I think is true for a lot of people who end up going to law school. I can say though that my parents were very happy when, growing up, I had voiced my interest in playing professional ice hockey, professional tennis player, and at one point be a professional musician, which they supported all of those endeavors. When they heard that I, out of my own volitions, wanted to go to law school and be a lawyer, they were very, very happy about that. So in my personal journey, I was very fortunate to have parents who kind of let me do, my own thing, and then I ended up pursuing the legal education because, I've always been really good at writing, and contrary to what people would see from media, from television, where lawyers are good at arguing, which a lot of them are good at arguing, but if you're a practicing lawyer, anybody will tell you that a lot of what we do is just writing, emails, and I was good at writing, and I think this profession suited me very well. And like President Kim said, I think it's a great profession, and if you make the best out of it and work hard, there's no limit to what you can do as a lawyer.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And if the previous question about upbringing and how law came to be a part of it sort of represents the past, I'd love to ask a question that represents the present, which is how have the members of the panelists understood kind of the intersection between Asian American Pacific Islander identities and the ways in which law and your practice of it and your knowledge of it have intersected? And in case that question may not be very clear or too general, it's coming from a place assuming that Asian American Pacific Islander identities and also our disciplines represent a lens with which to understand the world. And so I'm curious how for everyone, the practice of law and AAPI identity, both understood and inherited, have kind of intersected. Kim, can we start with you?
Sure. I think it is helpful to have, I work with a lot of minority businesses. I've always worked with a lot of minorities. My first job as a lawyer was a public defender in Alaska, where actually I had a lot of Alaska Native clients. And then I worked in New Orleans in nonprofit real estate development after Katrina. And of course, New Orleans is pretty famous for its people and culture. And I think being one, a daughter of immigrants, and two, an Asian American, is helpful in serving minorities. I think it makes the conversation, people feel less obligated to explain things to you about their journey. And indeed, you can kind of understand things that a minority would understand intuitively. And so though I haven't really been of the same ethnicity as the people I have served as an attorney or a professional using my degree in some way, I think it is helpful for connection. I think it's helpful for people to understand. I mean, even like in New Orleans, like food is incredibly important. So, I mean, if you can go to a meeting and you're not freaked out by, soups with like different items in it, right? Like that, all that stuff is so important in certain cultures that it does help. And it enables a level of trust, which is incredibly important in lawyering, and effective lawyering at least. And that is important. I think that, Brian's story is always mortifying but familiar, I think, to a lot of lawyers of color, to be mistaken for someone who's in trouble rather than someone who is hired as a professional to address issues. It's always an issue, and it's always mortifying for everyone. I mean, it's mortifying for everyone in the room, right? Not just the attorney and the judge, right? It's always like really inappropriate.
I can tell you the judge wasn't mortified.
I've seen a judge do it and he was mortified, but I can imagine not all judges would feel that
But I'm sorry to interrupt, but it was the very court that I ended up sitting in. That's the irony of it.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a judge refer to me as you people, right? When referring to a group I was organizing and working with, and they were Vietnamese Americans, and I mean, I knew that frankly, I went to a better law school and a better undergraduate than him, right? Like, and he's treating me like this peasant who, and it's always pretty terrible. But more importantly, I think that being API or APAs, depending on how you refer to it, has been incredibly important and helpful in building that trust relationship with your client. And when one component of lawyering that I emphasize with my students over and over and over is being able to be client-centered and being able to serve your client and create that relationship of trust to do the job the best you can. And I do think that we have an advantage in that area when we do serve people of color.
Thank you so much, Kim. Brian, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you. The question of cultural competency, the intersection of culture and the law, you can look at it from several different perspectives. As a professional, as Professor Vu-Dinh said, as an Asian American lawyer or as any lawyer of color with any ethnic background, to serve a particular community is extremely helpful because, again, information and processes that are unfamiliar to individuals not raised in the United States. You've heard the adage, things like possession is 9/10 of the law. Well, if you grew up in the United States in that kind of culture of knowledge, you know what that means and whether or not you're studied in the law. For immigrants, that means nothing, and its translation is means even less. And so, to have culturally competent professionals, whether it's in the law or in medicine or any other profession, is extremely helpful. When I was in law school, we started a Asian American legal clinic for Boston Chinatown, one of the first of its kind, where Asian American students were serving the needs of the Asian American community, particularly Boston Chinatown, which at the time was one of the more populous Chinatowns in the United States, to help with landlord-tenant issues, entitlements issues, that is the benefits, Social Security, SSI, and so on, immigration issues. And those individuals welcomed an Asian American facing and helping them face their problems. From another perspective, that intersection of culture and the law, at a particular point during my professional career, what I saw was, for example, in law firms, in many of the major law firms in the United States, there was a spate of hiring of Asian American graduates from law schools because the stereotype was that Asian American law students and law graduates were the model employees. You could hold them up in the library, have them do research, have them write the briefs, but never go to court because of the stereotype that Asian Americans are pacified and that they are not trial lawyers and that they didn't belong in court, nor do they belong in a deposition or in any public setting, but that they were the model minority to produce the work to be then taken to the courtroom and outside external areas by their non-Asian counterparts. So that was an interesting time when I was very involved in national Asian bar politics through the National Asian Bar Association, to talk about that and to see those things change. And then, of course, there was a movement to place Asian Americans on the bench. When I went on the bench in 2002, I was one of a handful of Asian American judges in the United States, and I was the first Asian American judge in my county. Following that, of course, we now have many Asian American judges on all levels, federal, state, and local courts. And so you see that intersection of culture and law. you know, when I went on the bench, Asians weren't seen as judge material. Now you see, and you know, I recently read an article in the New York Times where President Biden is considering a number of Asian American candidates for federal bench positions. And actually, I know many of them because they came of age to the law after I had been on the bench. And I had worked with them in the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association over the years. So it's been interesting to watch that growth and the intersection of law and culture. And also watching some of the presumptions and assumptions fade away over the years. But it's troublesome that some of them still remain in certain parts of the country. Going to the point that Mr. Kim raised about the question, where are you really from? You know, and that's an innocent question, but it's all about context. I was at an event, one of our school events, and an individual came up to me, unknown to me, and the first question to me wasn't, hello, how are you? Or hi, my name is so-and-so. But really, the first question out of that individual's mouth was, where are you really from? And, you know, that's an innocent question, and however intentional it may be. And I said, well, before coming to Arkansas, I lived in Chicago. And so the individual said, no, where are you really from? And so I said, well, I spent 32 years in Washington, DC. No, really, where are you really from? I said, I grew up in Los Angeles. No, tell me where you're really from. And so maybe some of our audience might understand the point that I'm getting at. But the point that I'm getting at is, you know, when you ask that question of a person of color, it implies to the person being asked, you're not really one of us, you're an outsider. And because this was a school event, you know, I answered as politely as I could, but that the individual wasn't aware of the implications of a question like that, or even things like, you speak English really good, right? Not even really well, but really good. Where did you learn English, or how did you learn English? Those are the kind of things that even as an attorney that I've faced over and over again. You know, each of us deals with it in different ways. I'd be really interested in hearing both Mr. Kim and Professor Vu Din's experiences in that regard. You know, unlike I came to this country at a time of turmoil in the 60s and grew up during the 70s and so on, with all of the varying changes that have occurred. I'd be interested in hearing of different experiences following some of those changes that have occurred.
Thank you so much, Brian. Sol?
To answer your question, I think when I first heard your question, I was thinking in the context of how my identity as a person and a member of AAPI shape the area of practice. And I think to an extent I can say that in some ways it has. I practice primarily immigration law, and I do family law as well. So, you know, being an immigrant, having gone through the processes that I help my clients with on a daily basis now, I can empathize with my clients, how they feel, what they go through, and the concerns they have. And in that sense, I think, you know, being a member of the AAPI allows me to be a better immigration lawyer. But having practiced law now for several years, I think there's another aspect to how I add value to my clients beyond just the kind of area of law that I practice. If you run a private practice, you'll often see not just, even if you advertise yourself as an immigration lawyer, you will have inevitably people who come with different issues. For me, I speak fluent Spanish and Korean. So I have noticed that over the years, people have sought for my services, even in practice areas that I'm not involved in. And I do try to keep a general practice, unless it's very, very specialized, like bankruptcy or something like that, then I would probably end up referring those to someone else. But I have noticed that as a result of my ability to speak the language, and as a result of my ability to understand how different people from different cultures think and process information, that has helped me become a better lawyer in various different areas of law. So I think, to answer your question, the fact that I am able to add value to my practice in those regards, language and an understanding of cultures, that has shaped me who I can serve and how I can serve better as a lawyer.
And since Brian mentioned this in his portion, if there was any follow-up to the question of experiences of being a perpetual foreigner, either Seoul or Kim or both?
Specifically in Northwest Arkansas, because this is primarily where I've practiced since I got licensed in 2014. I haven't really had negative experience. I think we have a very, very friendly and supportive bar here locally. So I don't have any negative experience. I will say, as a Asian lawyer, there's only probably less than 5 Asian American lawyers who are in private practice in our area, Washington, Benton, and even Sebastian County, probably less than 5. So anytime I go to a courtroom or a bar event, I don't necessarily think about it anymore because it's become such a normal thing for me. But it would stand out that I'm probably almost always going to be the only Asian lawyer in the room. To illustrate that point, I don't do a lot of criminal law, but I do from time to time, depending on the circumstances and who the client is. I was representing criminal defendant being charged with having driven while intoxicated. And in criminal cases, there is this hearing that you can ask for called suppression hearing, basically to argue to the court that the way law enforcement obtained certain information that is being used against the defendant was obtained illegally, therefore it should be tossed out. So those are typically very hard, not an easy hearing to win. And I had that hearing on a case probably 2-3 years into my practice. I was a relatively new lawyer, and I was very nervous at the same time, very excited. I thought I had a really good argument. We went in, and the hearing lasted more than an hour. And I remember preparing very, very thoroughly to do a good job. And to my surprise, the judge ruled in our favor and tossed the whole case against my client. And at the conclusion of that hearing, he called me to the bench and said, "You did a really great job there, Mr. Lim." And I realized that the whole time he was thinking that I'm a different lawyer. There's another very well-established, well-known, great lawyer by the name of Louis Lim here locally. And this judge thought the whole time that I was another lawyer who is probably, 10, 15 years my senior. And I didn't want to ruin the moment because I was happy. So I didn't call him out on that. But that's, stuff like that can happen here because there's just not many Asian lawyers. And I think that's part of the, where you having a thick skin really helps to not be upset at things like that can happen.
Kim, is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I think that comment about thick skin is really important. It's always surprising to me who says something that's insulting, and it's generally someone who has more authority than it's been. For me, it's been people who have been above me rather than clients or admin staff. It's always surprising when that comment of ignorance is going to come from someone who frankly should know better, right? I mean, I had a judge who I was in front of as a public defender. He had seen my name hundreds of times, right? As a public defender, you have a few hundred clients at a time. He had seen my name all over documents, and I was kind of closing up a negotiation with the DA, and he was during court, and he was trying to tell me to be quiet, and he kept calling me Ms. Vindaloo, right? I mean, which is a great Indian dish. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love chicken vindaloo, but it's man, this guy is Harvard educated. I mean, I have 2 syllables in my name, and I even offer people to just say VU, and I mean, everyone started laughing, including my client, because it was just so absurd. So I think it's important to have a sense of humor about it and, remember how lucky we are to be in the profession and how lucky we are not to have that kind of ignorance, because frankly, I mean, I would be mortified if I made that same mistake under those conditions. And yeah, a lot of folks aren't. And sadly, we are the ones who kind of start that engagement process for a lot of people, because there are not a lot of Asian Americans in the profession. And so, we're going to get a lot of questions like that. We're going to be the first person of Asian American descent that someone has had hours of conversation with. Teaching in Arkansas, no one has ever said anything discourteous to me. I mean, at all. My students have been incredibly respectful and deferential. But yeah, you will get something thrown at you that is surprising. And I think it's, for me, I've just tried to remember, you know what? I'm the lucky one. And, don't get upset or hurt. I think it's fair to be insulted, but I think it's really important just to remember, you're the lucky one. And, you're not your client and you're not the judge. You're in pretty good shape. So I think that is really important to remember, the thick skin thing. And then it'll come from people that it really shouldn't. And that's always the thing that kind of can throw you off.
Dr. Khan, can I add to that?
Of course, please.
It's funny that the idea of having a thick skin came up, because I was actually thinking about it before this too. My Korean given name, my birth name, is Kukhyun, which hardly anyone can pronounce it unless you're Korean. And so when we came to the United States, my dad wrote it in English and spelled this way, Gookhyun. And of course, it quickly got shortened to Gook.
Mm-hmm.
And being Asian and being called Gook, I had no idea the connotations that it presented. But I developed a thick skin at age 7 with that name because I got beat up almost every day on the playground because of the name. And, you know, I think it's important to have that thick skin. Of course, later on when I was naturalized, I changed it so that it would be easier for everyone, particularly on my right arm because I got punched so much. But you know, from that at an early age, developing that thick skin and being in the law with all of the various experiences, it is important. And I think both our panelists here make a really good point about that. You know, developing that thick skin and rolling with the punches. Now you call it out at times when you need to, but you know, you let a lot of things, and I'm sure many of the people whom we saw in the introduction have gone through similar experiences where they've just let it roll off their backs and move about their day, irrespective of the impact that it might have had either on the day or even a lasting impact. But yeah, I would agree about that thick skin-ness that we all need.
Thank you so much. Edison, would you like to ask the next question?
Sure, thanks, Jane. So Kim, Brian, and Sol, this is for me, I have a student. So let me provide context. So the University of Arkansas, our law school here in Fayetteville, we host a summer pre-law program called Spark. I'm currently hosting that right now. I stepped away from that. It's a 3-week program. We graduate on 11 June. I do have a student who identifies as Asian American and female student. And so we have that intersectionality. And Spark is, it was created by Access Lex, and we provide an overview of the legal education field for historically underrepresented population in legal education. So what advice, she couldn't make it today. What advice do you have for AAPI students or any resources that you can share with them on how to encourage them to reach this goal of legal in the legal field? Anyone can answer that, or all 3 of you may.
I can start. You know, I taught law school for 25 years. And what I would tell my students then, I would share the same thing with your student, is to do things that make him or her uncomfortable. Take risks, because at this point you can, and don't be afraid of what would normally be called failing, but don't be afraid to make the mistakes, because it's through those mistakes that he or she will become a better professional, better lawyer, if that's what the individual ends up being. But the bottom line is to take the risks. That'd be my advice.
Thank you.
I can go next. I think, you know, take the risks, and specifically take those risks to make connections with people that maybe you ordinarily wouldn't, to help you get through these risks, because law school is it can be pretty unpleasant. I mean, most law professors, myself included, actually enjoyed it, but most people don't. I mean, you know, that's what makes you a normal person, is like to not enjoy law school. And I think it is important to find people that you connect to and not be afraid to try and strengthen that connection. You know, it sounds like there is not an AAPIs at Fayetteville, and certainly there's not one at Bowen. But feel free to join other clubs, right? Like I joined BALSA in law school. There was a AAPIs and I was active in it. But I mean, I joined BALSA, like, honestly, because of the food at the meetings was just like, it was good. And so, and it like kind of helped me. I mean, it definitely helped me create connections that I probably wouldn't for at least a couple years, because everyone is so freaked out in law school. everyone is afraid to show any vulnerability. Everyone feels kind of the need to preen. I mean, the structure of law school is like, I think, not great for like making team players. And the doctrinal way of lecturing, it makes people think that they need to preen like peacocks. But in practice, you can't really be a successful attorney without being able to collaborate. It's just it's a nature of the profession in reality. And so while you're in law school and while you're in college, I think it's really important to make meaningful connections. And when you feel a connection with someone, don't be afraid to try and strengthen that connection, because it is useful, I think, emotionally and professionally to be able to do that. And, people of color are still minorities in law school, and that is going to be a fact for a long time. And if you're feeling that, or if you're just feeling isolated in general, consider joining other student groups where you might feel a connection. It's going to be extremely helpful in the kind of mental health component of just getting through a profession that is adversarial in nature.
Thank you.
As far as advice goes, I think I want to make 2 points. One general for law students, and the other one being more specifically to Asian American students. Generally speaking, I would say the best advice is to not quit. I think when I remember when I was in law school, the thing that I found most stressful wasn't the material that we were learning, or the study load or workload, or the part that I found most stressful about law school was competition. It's the perception of others knowing what they're doing, and that you're not on the same page as them. That's what I found the most stressful about law school, and had me thinking about quitting many, many, many times, more times than I can count. But at the end of the day, if I look at my office and look at my law license, it doesn't say what my GPA is, and it doesn't say whether or not I was in law review. And I have the same law license and the same law degree as every other lawyer who graduated with me. So if you're in law school and you feel stressed out about competition, you feel self-doubt, don't worry, don't quit, just finish and pass the bar, and you're in the same position as everybody else. And I can tell you, having now I'm in 8th year of practice, so much less than Brian, but a little more than a new lawyer. I can tell you that the things that they taught us in law school, while very helpful and in a lot of respects relevant, doesn't necessarily make you a good lawyer. I know plenty of people who are fantastic, great advocates who didn't necessarily graduate with honors or was part of law review. And I think the opposite is the same. There's plenty of classmates of mine who graduated with honors and were in law review that didn't quite pan out as successful lawyers. So I think that's my general advice to law students, to not feel discouraged, and do not quit. Finish school, and know that it'll be okay. And for Asian students, growing up in Guatemala and Mexico, and even in college, I have noticed that, and I'm sure Brian and Kim can make the same observation. I always noticed that Asian students, a lot of them just hang out in their own little groups. So if you look at the cafeteria at lunchtime, you'll see all the Asian students grouped together eating by themselves, and other minorities as well. That's not just specific to Asians. I think it's important to not feel afraid to branch out, and to have the courage to, be friends and get to know other people that you don't necessarily hang out with or comfortable with, because networking is going to be super important. And in your professional life, I would say probably most of the opportunities that people get with respect to their careers and employment is through people they know. People they knows another person who's looking for someone with your skill set. And so it's important to network as much as you can, get to know other people. And also, for that, you have to spend time and effort to build those relationships. It's not just going to a student event and say hello, introduce yourself, and not see those people ever again. You have to really make the investment of your time and effort to build really strong relationships that can open other doors for you. So I think that's super important to contribute to a law student's success as a lawyer.
And I just want to emphasize what Saul was talking about as far as don't feel pressured to do a fill in the blank thing. Don't feel pressured to join law review, or I think it's really important to be true to yourself and your interests when you're a law student. Everyone gets out of there happy. Everyone gets out of there finding something. We had a commencement speaker at our graduation at Bowen a couple years ago, and actually Judge Johnson, Judge Amy Dunn Johnson, she's a really respected leader in the nonprofit advocacy world, and then just recently became a judge. And she told this joke, and it was like, the students who get A's become law professors, the students who get B's become judges, and the students who get C's become millionaires. And I was like, ow, that is like really kind of stung. But I think that the important thing to remember there is, with this education, it's very easy to find a path that, because the education is so flexible, it's pretty easy to use this degree to find a path that works for you. So don't be discouraged if, moot court isn't your thing, and being in trials isn't something you want to do, or writing, 50 pages about a law topic is not something you want to do. Don't be discouraged. Don't think that there's something you're supposed to do and there are things that you're supposed to be interested in, and just stay true to your interests, and you're going to find that niche that makes sense for you.
Or the niche will find you.
Right.
Great. Thank you all very much.
There's a question in the chat from Dr. Danielle Williams, and I'd also like to take this chance to invite our listeners to type their questions to the panelists in the chat. But Danielle asks, for the panelists, why do you feel that there has been the rise of the Asian hate in America?
I don't know that there's a single answer to that. For years, Asian Americans have been seen as the model minority, and also there's a perception of a weakness within the Asian American community. People don't realize that the Asian American community is extremely diverse, with various different cultures, languages, and that spans an entire area of the globe. Not an area, but an immense region on the globe. But we're looked at as a singular minority, and there was some of the stereotypes are that Asian Americans come to the United States with a handful of money and they prosper in a short period of time following, either entrepreneurship or some other participation in the economy. And that might have had something to do with it. I don't know. I obviously I don't have the answer to it. The pandemic might have caused have had some impact on that. But anti-Asian violence has been around for a long time. What sparked the Asian American community to rise up in recent times is the murder of Vincent Chin. Now I know a lot of your audience has no idea what that's about, and I would urge people to look that up because that's what sparked my political activism within the Asian American community. I was a law student at the time when that happened. Just very briefly, for those of you who don't know, Vincent Chin was out celebrating his impending wedding on a bachelor party in Detroit, Michigan. This was during the time of the gas crisis. And he and his friends were at one table in a bar, and another group of individuals who happened to be auto workers, unemployed because of the gas crisis, were at another table. They exchanged words. When Vincent and his friends left the bar, the other gentlemen at the next table over got crowbars out of their car and beat to death Vincent Chin on the street. They were tried. The culprit was tried and was given basically a probationary sentence and laughed about it all the way outside the courthouse. And that awakened a giant within the Asian American community. And that's how organizations like the Organization for Chinese Americans, OCA, was born. So I don't know, it's been around for a long time, for decades, and I'm sad to see it occurring. I'm sad to see, and I'm horrified to see some of the footage that we're seeing in the media of the attacks. But those are some of the things that go through my mind as I see these events occur.
Thanks, Brian, for that perspective. I think it's easy to forget that violence against Asian Americans is not new. I think that statistically there has been some data showing it is on the rise right now. And I think that there's it's hard to say proven, but there is a correlation between the coronavirus epidemic and frankly, I really assign a lot of the dialogue around this to public officials, elected officials, who glom onto language to associate blame because the harder solution, the actual solution to the underlying issue, is quite difficult, right? So I'm a firm believer that, most hate is not logical, and it's based in fear, and it's based in ignorance. And the way the pandemic was handled when it first became an issue created a situation in which, every air-breathing human became vulnerable, and it was handled very poorly. And because of that, I think there was a need, an emotional need that people had to lash out, and people just are not rational when they're scared and when they're angry. And then when you have this dialogue by people who get a lot of public attention, this dialogue that encourages a scapegoat, that's when violence occurs. And until our elected officials, in my opinion, understand their responsibility to be leaders and use their powers to make good decisions that may be unpopular for a while, but that are good decisions. Until you see that kind of bravery from people who get a lot of public attention, then there will be violence against anyone they choose, right? And because of the kind of geographic history of the of the pandemic, Asian Americans are the target, right? I mean, I think a lot of us read about in Hot Springs, there was a person walking, a Vietnamese American walking out of the casino, and a firefighter from Bentonville beat him up, right? I mean, like, Vietnamese people have a long history of like war with China. Like, there's no, I mean, there's no logic in anything really. I mean, there's no logic at being angry with Chinese people for the coronavirus epidemic. But like, if you're, there's not even, but especially when it's like not even geographically accurate, right? To be angry at people who have a long history of not getting along with this country that you think you're angry at, right? None of this is logic, right? And it's really about fear, and it's really about feeling like things are out of control. So until the people who do have control over the health of a lot of people, a population, until those people learn to be leaders and learn to do what's necessary to protect the safety of the people who put them in power, you're going to get these incidents of violence that are targeted.
Sol, would you like to comment?
Sure. I think I know what Kim is referring to. I have also seen the studies, the recent studies that have pointed out the rise in the quantity of the incidents involving violence against Asians. I think, though, another thing is now that everybody has the ability to record something in public, that has put more of the graphic optics in the eye of the public, which I think is a great thing. I think the horrific incidents involving elderly Asian women in the Bay Area and all of those things, if someone had not bothered to flip their camera out and taken a video, reading that narrative through a news article is going to feel very different from watching it with your own eyes, the gravity of the situation. So in that sense, I think it's because we have better ability today to document these things and publish them. It's probably, I feel like we get to see it more, and it feels more real. But that's just to add to the point that I think the violence has always been there, but it's easier to document them and publish them now. And I just think that's a great thing because it helps hold people accountable.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Danielle, for your question. We have time maybe for one more question, if anyone in the audience would like to ask. Thank you so much, Danielle. Another question for the panelist. What has been your response to the stigma of COVID-19 regarding the Asian community, and how do you suggest we educate individuals about it?
Is the question regarding this with respect to stigma because of some perception that it originated in China? Is that where the question comes from? Sure.
Danielle is saying yes.
Okay. I'll take a first stab at it, and I'm going to springboard off of Professor Vu Din's earlier comments. I think the current political climate has a lot to do with it. When when our leaders aren't taking responsibility in some of the things that they're saying, and they're leading a dialogue that's easily subscribed to, and that gets spread, that's where that stigma can occur. And as a society, it's always easy to try to find blame, to place blame on the bad things that occur, rather than trying to do the research, follow the science, and really get to the logical reasons why certain things are occurring. It's easier, for example, to believe rumors than to find the truth. And similarly, analogously, it's easier to simply find a scapegoat, to borrow Saul's phrase, than to really find out how this occurred and why it occurred. So, I think the political climate had a lot to do with the stigma that's attached. And I do agree that that probably contributed to the current anti-Asian violence and anti-Asian hate that's occurring. While I firmly believe that that's been prevalent for generations, going back to the days when Asian American workers were imported for the railroads back in the 19th century, and so on.
Kim or Sol, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think when you see it, you call it out. If you see people discuss, if you hear people discussing, I think the best way to illustrate that point is, I had personally nothing to do with, whether, regardless of what the origins of the virus is, I had nothing to do with that. I was here in 2019 or 18. So, and so were so many other people. Most of the people, I would argue, had nothing to do with that. So to direct your anger to people just because they look like the people who, wherever the virus came from, is completely ignorant and it's misguided. And I think a lot of people who are not in our shoes don't understand that. And I've had to have this discussion with, people who are non-Asians, who are well-meaning people who I think sympathized, or at least thought that it was logical that the virus would be called the China virus because it came from there, not understanding what impact that really has in the narrative. So personally, my response to the stigma was, when I hear the narrative, I just call it out and talk about it, and and help people understand how it makes no sense to, and how misguided it is to, feel angry at the entire race of people because of what happened.
Yeah, this is such a commonsensical but difficult question, right? Because there's just been so much ignorance about COVID in general, right? And there's been so much ignorance about vaccines in general. And, I have, I say this kind of laughing, but my husband has said, I'm not allowed to go on Facebook and read political posts before bed anymore. And I think the last 4 years actually has taught me a lot about advocacy, and that, there are certain, when people have a visceral relationship to an idea, right? That's not based in their own research. That's not based in their own hard work. That's not based in hours of learning something. Then your odds of changing their mind in 20 words are very low, right? And so save your kind of emotional energy for when those odds are higher. And I think those odds are higher with people that you have a real relationship with. And, you know, everyone jokes about like avoid certain topics at Thanksgiving. And I'm like, you know, if there's anyone you're going to convince, it's going to be people who love you and people who care about you and respect your opinion already, or people who have, right? For me, it's like kind of easy, right? Like people have to attend my class to graduate. So it's different, right? And it's a really controlled environment. And it's so different from Facebook, right? Like I lecture to 100 students at a time. And for sure, I mean, like on a statistical basis, probably 2/3 of them have a very different political opinion than I do. But there is never disrespect in the classroom because there's a culture of respect, and there's a culture and there's a format of how you discuss difficult topics, and there's a format as to how you view and engage others, and there's not on social media, right? And so I'm a big sharer of articles, but when it comes to discussion involving actual information, you know, I really save it for person to person, in-person occasions, and occasions with people who already respect me and who I already respect, because you're just not gonna have a fruitful conversation with someone that you don't know well, or in an environment where there isn't that culture of respect. And I wholly agree that social media is one of those environments where it's lawless, right? But I do think it's important to be willing to engage in that conversation with people who you already have a relationship with, and really try and engage from it being centered on their perspective, right? And really being deliberate in thinking about why they have these conclusions and what brought them to those conclusions. And if you don't know, simply asking from a, you know, non-judgmental way. And it's easier to be non-judgmental when it is someone you care about and it is someone who you respect. Yeah, so no more Facebook right before going to bed on these topics.
Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you to all of our panelists for such a rich discussion. I would like to hand it over now to Dr. Mary Margaret Hoy, who is the Senior Executive Assistant and Chief of Staff to the Dean to the College of Education and Health, for closing remarks.
Hi, thank you so much. So I want to say thank you to our panelists, Brian, Kim, and Sol, for adding to our discussion on the accomplishments and complexities of AAPIs in the legal profession as part of our celebration for Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And we know that now more than ever that our work is so important. So I want to remind you that while the work we are doing here today and this discussion that we've had is so important and such a great step forward, it does not stop here. So it's up to us to propel the conversation on AAPIs forward. So we must initiate a dialogue with others. And I really invite you to share with someone who was not able to attend today your top 3 takeaways from today's panel. Here's what I plan to share with others. Our experiences deepen and diversify the ways we serve others through various aspects of the law through cultural competency, and this could likely apply to any other profession. Racial stereotypes and microaggressions still exist in a wide range of areas, from inability to serve in a leadership role to the lack of ability to withstand court. These perceptions cast AAPIs and people of color in the legal profession into a state of otherness, and we must identify these misperceptions and call them out for what they are. And finally, there's also this duality of having both the honor and responsibility to represent AAPIs in the legal profession. And again, this likely also applies to other professions as well. So we know now that, again, this work is so important, this conversation is so valuable, and I thank you for attending. I want to thank you again to our three panelists, as well as the U of A's Office of Equal Opportunity and Compliance, the Asian Pacific American Employee Impact Group, and the School of Law. So thank you, everyone, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.